everybody kind of reassessed their lives and everybody started learning how to fly. So we haven't seen numbers like this since 1980. In the United States, we've got 848,000 people that are at least a student pilot. So of that giant number, 345,000 are student pilots. So we've got a nice pipeline going. Again, we still have a pilot shortage, but it's experienced pilot shortage, not for lack of people wanting to fly. But what that's done is driven down the percentages of women in the United States. So we're down to 4.3% of all licensed pilots in the United States are women. So our numbers have actually gone down, but that's only because we've increased the volume of pilots. So just want to give you a quick peek of what that looked like here in the United States. So today what we're going to talk about is training past the mistake. Everything we do in aviation is to prevent making a mistake, right? But we're going to talk about the reality is we're going to make a mistake. And aviation doesn't allow for that situation. So I'm here to just talk about what your brain is doing after we do that. The best example I can give is changing for training in the United States. We all learned how to do spin training. So we'd actually put the aircraft into a spin when we were learning how to fly. So that taught pilots on how to get out of it. But we had so many fatal accidents. Our Federal Aviation Administration came in and said, no more. We want everyone to train on stall recognition. So we'll train so that people don't actually get into a spin, which is a great idea. So the reality is that the first time a pilot is going to get themselves into a spin is all by themselves, probably. So what can we do to help in that moment? So learning how to visualize, all the virtual reality goggles that are coming out actually are going to be helpful. So if your brain can visualize a situation, even if you've never been in it, it will actually have a pathway of learning to go to. So even if you've never spun an airplane, but if we have a couple sessions on visualizing what that looks like and visualizing how to get out of it, if it ever happens, your brain has somewhere to go. If we don't visualize it or don't even talk about it, if and when it happens to you, your brain is just going to go, I don't know what to do here. I don't even know the first step. So that's kind of what we're doing today. We're just allowing our brains to get past that mistake and putting it into a situation. So truly, this is a huge topic. And so I'm just pulling out a couple chunks of it. So today we're just going to go over some of the reasons why we make mistakes, what our responses are and how our personality affects our responses, going back to some weird root cause reasons for the behavior. And I'm just going to pull out a couple case studies, just a little variety to give you an example. So before I start, we're going to armchair quarterback. And I know some people don't like doing that, but I think it's really important. I never judge a pilot's reasoning or mistakes because I definitely could have made the exact same mistake. So today we're going to try to get ourselves into that pilot's seat and understand why they made that mistake without judging. So I just kind of want to throw that in there, that we're not judging anybody. We're just going through the facts here. So I just want to start with mindset. And I learned very early on in my career that makes all the difference. So my very first job was working the front desk of an FBO in a little airport southwest of Minnesota, middle of the country. And we had a company called NOAA. They had a fleet of these old Shrike commanders that they flew every day. They were out doing grid work, taking photos of the Earth. And one day, one of the airplanes had to shut down the engine. So the airport alarms went off. I'd never heard it before, but an airplane was coming in with one of the engines shut down. So he lands just fine, comes in, and the war stories start talking about how hard it was to get this airplane under control with one engine and what a terrible airplane it was. So in my mind, I just, I was so amazed that this pilot was able to get the airplane on the ground. And that very same summer, I got to go to the Reno air races and an air show. And I saw this guy. And in the United States, everybody knows who he is. He's a legend, Bob Hoover. He's since passed away. My brand new students have no idea who he is, so I'd like to keep his spirit alive. But this same gentleman would take this exact same airplane and go out and fly and do maneuvers. He would go out and shut down one engine and then do his air show. And then he would shut down both engines and continue doing aerobatics. So it was just interesting to see what a mindset change can do, right? And understanding an airplane so well that you know what that airplane is capable of doing. So, going above and beyond just knowing what the switches do, but actually understanding that airplane and all of its characteristics, and asking everybody to really take that extra step to understand their airplanes. So the lesson that we're talking about today is kind of his philosophy too, and I love his quote here. So if you're faced with a forced landing, fly the thing as far into the crash as possible, right? So I hear the cockpit voice recorder on too many NTSB accidents where you could hear the pilot just giving up, right? Your brain is completely shut down because you just don't know what to do or where to go. So I like the idea of, even if you know that you're outside the parameters and then it's going to be bad, let's make it less bad. So being self-aware of that moment is going to change everything. And one quick note in the United States, we're talking a little bit, our leadership is talking a little bit more about actually punishing and taking away pilots' licenses for errors that they think are above and beyond the norm. So even like a runway excursion or incursion where somebody didn't hold short, they are talking about taking away their licenses. So everyone's a little bit fearful of being able to report accidents or incidents. And we're trying to keep the safety culture going, and we want people to be honest. So it's a little bit of a concern. So I had to laugh. I Googled, or I asked AI to present an image of what a male and female pilot look like. It took me about 12 different images of the woman to get an image. The first ones that came out, they were all V-cut, low-cut shirts. I'm like, what is happening here? So this is the best I can get. But you know what I love about this is count how many stripes on her shoulders. She's got 5 of them on there. So I'm like, okay, AI thinks that she's above and beyond a captain. So I appreciate that. So, but among my research in pilot personality, there is a common thread among all pilots, which I have found. So this is, generalizing a behavior, but this is an observable behavior that I've seen across the board. So I don't care as much how you test on a personality test, because it'll be different every day. But this is what you as a pilot in a crew environment, this is what I observe that they have. So pilots in general are introverts. They really are. Their rest of their lives are very introverted behaviors, but when they are in their pilot role, they become extroverted, which is a skill. So we have different categories of aviation. So I'm talking about an environment where you have to work with a crew. The second thing the pilots are good at is their sensing. They are focusing on the here and now. They really want data and facts. They really don't want to operate on opinions, which is a good thing, right? So when they think about things, they think in linear, logical, independent thought processes, which is an important thing. On their judging characteristics, they actually prefer structure. They like crew resource management, checklist flows. The downside of that is when they make a decision, they're kind of absolute in their decision. So even during an emergency situation, they may immediately decide what they think the problem is. And it's really hard to get a pilot personality to shake off of that. So that's something we need to do, is be able to open up our minds during an emergency to all possibilities. So here's the observable skills. So when you take your aptitude and your personality, mix them together, this is the other common thread that pilots have. And even if you're not a pilot, you still have to work with them. So it's good to understand them. So good spatial orientation, that's the ability to think three-dimensionally. This is a pilot's superpower in general, but this one superpower is your downfall during an emergency, because when you have a startle effect, what happens? Your entire field of vision becomes very narrow, and you start focusing just on the failed instrument or whatever you heard. If there's an annunciator light, you stop taking in all of your other information which you need, and you start just tunnel visioning. So just keep that in mind. Pilots have low neuroticism. I know lots of neurotic pilots, but they actually have low neuroticism. And that's just that ability to detach during an emergency. So we all know someone that overreacts to things. They should never be a pilot. Pilots learn how and generally have a tendency towards being able to pull away that emotion. So when that engine blows up, you kind of like, you go calm and you detach from that fear. It's an important skill to have. The downside is that maybe your spouse doesn't appreciate that you can compartmentalize and detach from your emotions. So it can be a problem. We kind of talked about the extroversion, introversion already. The downside of that is sometimes pilots can have an aggressive opinion. They maybe can easily point out someone else's mistakes and don't do it so nicely. So just keep an eye on that. We often tag ego with a bad thing. In aviation, especially for women, we really need to develop that ego. You want complete confidence. When you sit in that seat, you want to believe that you're going to get that airplane to its destination no matter what happens. So it's actually an important thing to have. The multidimensional thinking kind of wraps into the spatial orientation. The downside of that is that, especially on items like maybe an unstabilized approach, instead of pilots thinking about, hey, maybe we just need to go around, the pilot personality will want to fix every mistake one at a time. So if you're left of course, they're going to fix that. If you're off airspeed, then they'll fix that. Instead of looking at the situation and saying, you know what, it's best if we just fix the situation and go around, they're going to continue that bad approach, fixing one thing at a time. The company I work for, we track runway excursions. In business aviation, we have about one a week, and it generally starts with an unstabilized approach and the pilot continuing on and to a bad landing, and they end up going off the runway. So we definitely keep an eye on that. So today I'm gonna kind of drill down on one particular type of like startle. I thought this was interesting because I was digging through the EASA information on what are those negative things that makes pilots like, startle. What is that? Other crew member actions. I love this one because often, even in your own life, somebody that you're with might make a mistake, and especially women, we react a little bit differently because more often than not, we think that we're wrong first. So we go through this process of watching somebody make a mistake, and then we think to ourselves, oh, well, I must be mistaken. And so we go through this a little bit longer process. So I just thought that was interesting, and I'm going to give you a couple examples here what that looks like. So other crew member act, the very first time I ever had this weird black swan event, I was flying a King Air for a company. We flew charter, air ambulance, hazardous materials, you name it, we flew it. We flew cargo, everything in this King Air. So I was coming back from a trip. We had dropped off our passengers at the Minneapolis airport, which is the main airport, and we had a 10-minute flight to get back to our airport. And little short flights are just condensed with so much to do. Once you take off, you're already starting your approach checklist. So it's really busy environment. And the company was waiting for this airplane. They had another flight out. We had an air ambulance flight going out. So they were waiting for us. So we're kind of in a hurry. So we land at Flying Cloud Airport, and I'm letting the first officer fly. My co-pilot is flying, and I'm not paying much attention. My head's already back at the FBO. So he lands, and we're rolling to the end. And what I think is him putting the aircraft into the reverse propeller, he actually shut down both engines. And we got off the runway, and I'm like, what is happening here? It was so outside the realm of operations, right? So we're rolling to a stop, and I said, oh, you shut off the fuel. And he immediately said, no, I didn't. He honestly didn't realize that he had done it. His brain was already on the ramp and getting ready to get out of the airplane. So all of a sudden, this little normal landing kind of turned into this moment of just chaos, because in my mind, I wasn't even sure what to do. Because when he realized that he had shut the fuel down, his instinct immediately was he started to lift the fuel levers, which when you're the engines are in the process of shutting down would have been bad. So I quick stopped him from that. And I said, okay, let's just get it parked. And, of course, now I don't want to tell the tower what's happening. So I just said, I told him that we were working on a maintenance issue and could we just sit here for a moment? Because airplanes were landing behind us and trying to exit off of our taxiway. And so there's all these layers of things going on in just a normal moment that turned into a weird anomaly. So it taught me right then and there to fix the situation and not the mistake, and then talk about it when we got back. So even recently with a recent accident, there was some talk about a pilot actually maybe shutting down the engines. We still don't know, but here's an example of where it actually happened. No big deal. We were on the ground, but then it made me wonder what would have happened if we were in the air. Would I have known how to start that airplane in that situation? So the flow of all the psychological and physical reactions in that moment and what's happening to you, you're going to have that moment where your brain says some sort of swear word, right? It's going to know something's wrong. Before you even know what the mistake is, your brain's going to go, something's not right. So you need to trust that instinct. So you flow from that confusion to, okay, I realize there is now a mistake. Either you made it or the other person made it. But now your brain is going to function and look down at that mistake. So your instinct is to quickly fix it. Reach out and go put back what you just did. But in aviation, that could cost you. The best action is a non-action and admitting the mistake immediately, which is super hard to do, or even pointing out the mistake, especially if you have a dominating captain. It's really hard to point out that mistake, but you got to remember, your life doesn't care about, your feelings. It needs you to be very vocal in that moment and just explain what happened so that you can work on it together. So I just pulled out one example of like an anomaly like this. Actually, 2 people survived this accident. This happened in the United States. It was with a Premier aircraft. I won't go through all the details. Every accident has tons of layers. So I'm truly just pulling out the big things. There's lots of reasons for it. But in this situation, there's 2 pilots, not with a lot of time. The captain had just under 2,000 hours. He was new to the jet. And new with a first-time right-seated pilot-rated or jet-rated first officer. I know it was confusing. Inexperienced right-seater. So during the descent, the captain was trying to show the first officer how to slow the aircraft down. There were several times they oversped the aircraft. The alarm was going off. Air traffic control was giving them speed restrictions. And the captain said, just pull the power off. So in that first officer's brain, inexperience, he actually shut down both engines because he certainly pulled the power off, right? So it took the captain a few moments to even realize what had happened because their electrical system started shutting down. Eventually, everything started shutting down. So they did declare an emergency. He told Tower that they had no control, no hydraulics. And I'm going to skip forward to their first approach. Because they didn't switch their power to the essential power, they did not get the gear down. So when Tower saw them coming in close to landing, Tower, knowing that they didn't have control of their airplane, actually told them to go around. And didn't just say go around, they were yelling it at them. Go around, gear not down. And I think both pilots startled and they tried to go around. And piecing it together, it sounds like they actually got one engine started, but they had not switched the power to the essential bus. So they actually made it and came back in around and tried to land, and Tower told them to go around again. They were actually right above the runway. They were a little bit higher speed, but they were at least in the runway environment. And this picture is the result of the go around. So if they had just, even if the gear was up and they had just set it down in the runway environment, they probably had a much better chance of a better outcome than this. So definitely layers of reasonings for the mistake, but the startle at the end from the Tower kind of got them in the mindset to go around. I just pulled out one, the airline incidents. This is kind of a little bit applicable to maybe even just a more current accident, but I call this the mountain bike effect. I've seen it happen several times, and the scenario on this one, this is a super high time captain. So these are the ones that always draw my attention, because how can a 20,000-hour pilot make a mistake like this? Because the reality is, if they can do it, we can all do it. So what are those things that drive your brain to make a weird mistake? So on this one, this is a 767 right after takeoff. They're at 1,600 feet. They get an amber warning light. So they had a fuel flow light that came on. And so the first officer isn't sure what it is, but he calls out fuel flow. And so the captain's brain heard the words fuel flow. And so instead of pushing the button to go to manual control, the captain actually shut off the fuel flow, pulled the two knobs and shut it off. So I live in Colorado in the mountains, and often when I'm out on the trails and it's quiet and peaceful, we have mountain bikers that come up behind you, and they're supposed to call out that they're behind you and to tell you what side they're going to pass you on. So every time a mountain biker does this, it startles me. I hear him call out on your left or on your right. And what happens in my brain is they call out the words like, I'm on your left, and my brain hears left. So what do? I step left right in front of them. Instead of going to the right, my brain just hears that last word, and I do what I think is going to keep me safe. So I've had to learn, when a mountain biker startles me, to just stand still and then look back and look at my situation. And then I decide what side of the path, I'll step on to let them go by. But so here's an example of an airline captain who accidentally shut down both engines. The ram air turbine deployed. The captain called back to the passengers and flight attendants and told them to prepare for a crash. And then they realized the mistake. Because these are professionals, they were able to immediately start both engines. They got the aircraft reconfigured in a positive climb, got themselves back in the situation again. And the conversation between them is, they're like, okay, that was our mistake. The airplane's fine. So they continued on to their destination. And actually, they both got fired. But the reason why is that they continued the flight. So it's an interesting conversation to have with the flight department. Like, really, the airplane was in an okay condition. So I don't know, I might have continued on too. But they ultimately got fired for the secondary action, not the primary action. But we always think, it'll never happen. But here's an example of it happening. I'll keep an eye on the time. So in a mistake and a startle, you're going to have an emotional response that you cannot control. You can't help it. Even like looking at this picture, it's going to bug you. Even if you tell your brain, just relax, it's just black and white, it doesn't matter. There's an external input coming into your brain that is going to affect the way that you think. So startle and panic, you're going to have an intake of breath, which is good. This is Mother Nature helping you. So continue on with that breath. Being self-aware in the very beginning of a startle and getting on top of it immediately will change the outcome of that situation. Especially if it's a mistake, you're going to have this ego response, especially women. We don't ever want to admit that we made a mistake. You're going to have shame of having made a mistake, or you might instantly want to deny it. That's kind of a human response, is saying, no, I didn't, or downplay it. Say, it's not a big deal, I'll fix it. And then once again, we talked about the tunnel vision, what's happening. All these things reduce your situational awareness. So you'll also have an adrenaline surge going through your body. So you actually have chemistry in there that's interfering with your thoughts. I'm sure you've all been in a situation where you've got adrenaline, and then your legs and arms will tremble. I got hit by lightning once in the 727, and I didn't realize until the very end, when I got to the gate, I could hardly take my hands off the yoke. I'd been gripping them so hard, and my legs had been just so, pushing on the rudders so hard. I got to the gate, and that is when I kind of like fell apart. So dry mouth instantly is going to be hard to communicate, especially if you have a oxygen situation, you're on an oxygen mask. But pay attention to your breathing. It sounds so simple and so minor, but it makes all the difference for you to be able to gain control of your breathing and continue on with that sharp intake of breath and just take additional breaths and then get on with the checklist, get on with the emergency, but just that's all how long it takes. 1 second to change the response, taking that deeper breath and then continuing on. So for time compression, I'm going to just skip a few of these. I'm going to skip this one. And I just want to go into your kind of towards the end on what you can do in these moments, some other things that you can do. So be aware of your cognitive overload. The other side of like immediately trying to fix a mistake is freezing. I know lots of pilots, I've seen them freeze up during a moment of confusion, startle. So this is the other end of the spectrum. And then even once you figure out the mistake, then being so caught up in the moment that you can't even proceed forward and not even sure what the next step is. So let me go through this one. We've all probably seen this picture. This is from a few years ago. Another example of like inappropriate action out of a misinterpretation. And I'm trying to skip some of the details. Kind of the moral of the story is that the entire crew realized at the end what had happened. The captain finally admitted, I pulled back on the wrong side throttle. So the last moment, so they had recognition of the situation. So the captain started yelling, restart the engine. And he said it 7 times on the cockpit voice recorder. So in that moment, the other person doesn't even know to begin that first step. It's so important to clarify, instead of just restart the engine, what is that first step that is actually necessary, right? Move the throttle, turn on the ignition, be very clear on that first step back into fixing the problem. Instead of just kind of reaffirming what the situation is, you need to lead that situation with that first step of how to fix it. So there's your response to the mistake, kind of the flow we're going through. The tunnel vision is going to happen first, rush to action, or possibly a freeze. You're going to have a quick bias about diagnosing the problem, putting in your opinion in there. And then I just want to highlight that co-pilot syndrome. Man, how many times have I done that? Not trusting yourself, even though you pretty much know you're right and you saw somebody else make a mistake. We go through this process of saying, well, I must be reading the situation wrong. At that time, you have to drop your ego, verbalize what you're actually seeing, and get to the point much faster. And I'm going to skip this one. And I'm just going to kind of get down to the end here. So when during my studies and trying to understand how we can train pilots better on the startle effect, right from the very beginning, I was training ab initio pilots who never even flown before. So I thought, how can we train reflexes early on in somebody's career? So it was interesting to find out that the baseline of the way you startle is because of your parents. So you can go home and blame them today. So 70% of your personality in this regard is already set from the day that you're born. So you can take a brand new baby and startle them. And if you've got 10 of them in the baskets, they're all going to startle at different level. Some of them maybe won't startle at all. Some of them will startle and not be able to calm themselves down. Some will have, all these variants of how you can self-soothe yourself out of a situation. So I thought it was interesting that a lot of it's hereditary. Schizophrenics actually have a low startle response. So I'm trying to train all the pilots to be schizophrenics. So to reduce that startle reflex. And just what you're doing here today, you're going to be forever changed because you are going to have self-awareness. The next time you're in your car and somebody almost hits you, you're now going to realize and pay attention to all those things that are happening in your body. And because you're doing that, you're actually practicing on how to get out of that response quicker. So I'm going to end just with an example. I will never show anybody a situation where somebody's going to who will, not make it out of the accident. This pilot is going to be fine, even though it looks terrible. So it's really hard to show somebody what a freeze looks like. We maybe have all done it. This is a good example of a pilot getting in a situation. It was started off as a very minor situation, but his personality, the pilot personality, is going to commit to this touch and go. So as you watch it, just pay attention to when you think he makes the full commitment. Watch how the aileron, the yoke and stuff he's got turned. And I'm really thankful that he didn't actually take off in this situation, because if he actually got back in the air, he may not have survived. So I'm just going to show you an example of what that looks like. We'll see if this works. Maybe. Let me do the next one here. Oh, maybe the video is not going to work. Hey, hang on.
You can always send it to us later, and we can
check
it out if you have it. Yeah.
It's not going. So
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Now I can't even get to skip the screen now.
Oh no.
That's all right. It's all. Let me try this side. There you go.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, and you guys, you can all email me, and I'll send you the video. It's just he commits to the takeoff. He actually exits the runway and actually hits a hangar. He's so committed on fixing every little mistake that he's not looking at the situation. Ends up going right into the hangars. He does live, but he definitely totaled the aircraft. So, so controlling your startle reflex. Visualizing training. I don't know if anybody here is an instructor. It's so important to have that scenario-based training and get your students to actually close their eyes and go through the maneuvers that you're about to go out and do. If you do that, your pilot is going to be so far ahead because their brain already has a synapse laid down to what that looks like. And your brain actually doesn't even know the difference between actually having done it or actually having it simulated in your brain. Self-awareness we've talked about, and elevating your influence. That's really hard for women. And once you do it, you will feel empowered and realizing that you're just as important as everybody else in that situation. And everything is a matter of life and death. We have to remember in that moment that how important our voices really are. The other thing I like to encourage is chaos training. We have these amazing simulators, and we do not use them to their full effect. Every time I'd walk into the simulator, your job is on the line. So you do not want any extra weird scenarios. That's the reality of it. So what we need to do is set aside 10 or 15 minutes at the end of our sim sessions to really just go out and sweat and have some fun. Have instructors give multiple layers of emergencies and then take away the checklist. I want pilots to have full panic mode in the simulators and just have fun with it. If you crash the airplane, you buy the beer. Leave it at that. But it's really important to let your brain work its way through a system. You'll find out really quickly where your weaknesses are, where your strengths are, if you understand a system by taking away the checklist and going through logically what you think you can do to get that aircraft in a condition to land. Because ultimately, that's all you need. You don't need any engines. You just need airspeed and a place to set it down, right? If I have good airspeed and I have the Hudson River, I can get that airplane down into that landing situation. So really, at the end of the day, what do you need to get that airplane on the ground? So if you guys need or want the presentation, you can reach me. I'm on LinkedIn. That's the best place to track me down. You can email me, ask me any questions. I'm always here. And then when you're ready for your first job, if you are at that point in your career, let me know. I work with about 500 flight departments right now. We've got about 25,000 students in the system that I work for at Advanced Air Crew Academy. I hear about job openings in business aviation. So please always, let me know. So let me turn this down here. And so if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand. If you don't want to do it in front of everybody, you can email me. You can, put it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Erika. This was fascinating. I was wondering, can I put the presentation into the Ladies Beyond Flying group on LinkedIn and just
Absolutely.
upload it there? Great. That's fabulous.
Yeah. And I have like 10 more hours of information. So I know it's kind of hodgepodge together, but it's just to get your brain started thinking and paying more attention to yourselves in that moment of startle. So